Our reading this night for this Maundy, Thursday, comes from John, the 13th chapter. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed him the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless you wash my feet, you will have no part with me." "Then, Lord," said Simon Peter, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For Jesus knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, "Not every one was clean." When Jesus had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth. No servant is greater than his master, nor messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now. Where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you. Love one another, as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Here ends the gospel reading. What would you do and what would you say if you knew you would soon die? Now, of course, in movies or TV shows or in books and other types of media, we often see where people get to have these long, drawn-out speeches, say dramatic and all the things they want to say, even if they're on the verge of death and have all kinds of mortal wounds. But the reality is, in life, things don't always work out that way. Often they don't work out the way, quite the opposite. People don't often have that chance to do what they want to do before they pass away. They don't have those opportunities. But if you knew when you would die, what would you say? And what would you do? Would you say, get your affairs in order? Like, what would you do with your possessions, your estate? Would you write things down or just make sure everything was okay? Because I'm sure many of us here have wills or something planned out already. You have things where you have items designated for certain people. You have a whole thing, whole ideas of what happens after you pass on. If you were going to die and you knew it, would you say, record something? Write down some words of wisdom, all that you have accumulated over your years on this earth, that you wanted to be written down or recorded, as I said. Some words of wisdom for your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, for people for years on end to know something great that you've learned, some wisdom that all people should know. If you knew you were going to die, what would you say and what would you do? Now tonight, we see just a little bit of what Jesus does when he knows that he will die. Because Jesus, he knows very soon he'll be going to the cross. Jesus knows he'll be going to the cross. This night is known as the Last Supper for him because soon he'll be arrested and then, of course, put on trial and then go to the cross. So what does Jesus choose to do? He chooses to celebrate the Passover. Celebrate this meal which, of course, remembers how the Israelites escaped slavery in Egypt. Celebrate this important meal with his disciples. Celebrating the power of God breaking into the lives of the people so they can have freedom, so they can be saved. So Jesus celebrates this important meal with all the symbolism it has for the Jewish people, all that it means. And then what else does Jesus do? He washes the disciples' feet. Now, of course, in the time of Jesus, people walked almost everywhere. Some people would have access to donkeys or other beasts of burden. If somebody's really wealthy, they might have a horse, but people would normally walk everywhere. They'd wear sandals, which of course would be open. A lot of people would walk around in bare feet. And chances are you won't have too many paved roads. Some towns, some places, there'd be paved roads, but oftentimes just dirt roads. So people would be walking around and their feet get dirty. Really dirty. So imagine walking around on dirt roads all day. Miles of dirt roads. How dirty your feet might get. So foot washing was a necessity. Something that had to be done. And a job that wasn't always desired. A job that somebody who was a slave, a servant who was low on the totem pole, or somebody who really cared, somebody who loved, would do. Jesus, who is the master of these disciples, who is the one they call Lord, the one that they recognize as the great prophet, the one who is the Messiah. He washes their feet. In his final time on this earth, Jesus chooses to show an example of love. That is Christ's decision. An example to show to all people. After Jesus washes the disciples' feet, Jesus says to the disciples, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you." Do you love in a way that gives? Truly gives. Gives that you give of yourself so much that you do something that others might deem not a great job. A job that others would say, I don't want to do this. I would never do this because I might lose rank, position, or it's just a job you never want to do because it's dirty and kind of gross. That's what Jesus is calling his disciples and, of course, us to do. To love others so much that we do these things, like foot washing, or think what it might be for you. There's jobs you might stray away from. There's things you could do for another, but you would do them because of love. That's the kind of love Jesus calls us to have, to love each other so much, in such a grand way. We are called to be people who love at all times in our lives. Love now and love all the way to the end. That is how we are as Christians, to continue to be a people of love. Always loving, always caring no matter what. No matter what place we find ourselves in this life. Now, I've had the privilege to walk with people who are about to die. Now, of course, with our modern medicine, we can kind of get a guess on how long somebody might live. And I've often seen people try to do acts of love even though they know they will soon die. I remember one man who, he had a specialty in baking. And one of the things he did for family members and friends was bake cakes. It's just something he tried to do in his last months. He was told he had a couple months to live, and so he decided to start baking cakes. That was his way of showing love to people. Even towards the end, when he started not to really being able to bake, he tried to push himself. He even had some of his grandchildren, well, great-grandchildren really, help him out a little bit just so he could do this task. It was his loving way he lived towards the end of his life. I remember a woman by the name of Catherine. I walked into her home, and her little home that she had, I walked in one day, and there she was sitting at a table. And Catherine was there, and she was rolling pennies. I asked Catherine what she was doing. And by this time, she was told she only had a couple of weeks left in her life. And she said she was rolling pennies to help this fundraiser to help missionaries who were working overseas that the church was doing a fundraiser for. You see, Catherine knew about this fundraiser in the church. And so she went around the house, seeing what kind of loose change she had. Her goal at the end of her life was to take that change and use it for good in this world. She could have just not done that. She could have just not cared. But she cared and loved with what little bit of time she had on this earth, what little bit of money she could find around her little house. There's so many ways to love. So many ways to love in our lives. Ways we can continue to keep loving, no matter what. Jesus says this night, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Jesus calls us to love at the deepest level, to love no matter what. Keep loving. Love in such wonderful and great ways. Love in ways that challenge you in ways you could never imagine. Challenge you in ways like Jesus shows this night with foot washing. Jobs you'd rather not do. Jobs that seem like you'd never do in a million years, especially for people you think, why would I do that for those people? Just love. Love in the deepest way, and understand who is the Lord of love, Jesus Christ. Because, of course, Jesus showed how to love through the example of foot washing. And Jesus showed how to love because of what he will do after the Last Supper. Jesus, who goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus, who prays. He prays. He wants the pressure of going to the cross taken away from him, but he says to God, "Not my will, but your will be done." And he is arrested, goes on trial, and then is crucified. Jesus, he goes to the cross and dies for us and for our sins. Jesus, he does this because he loves us. Know this reality. Understand this truth. He does this because he loves us. Love like him. Love like him and know what he does for you. Amen.